And we are live with Eva Moskowitz, the famed founder and leader of Success Academy. And this is an interview in a long time in the running, long time in the making. I've been waiting for this. This is amazing for me. So Eva, thank you for joining this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you. At the outset, I think we should talk a little bit about the specifics, of Success Academy. So for the people watching and listening who have, if you've been under a rock and you haven't heard of Success Academy in New York, this is what you need to know. It's the 7th largest school district in the state of New York. 7th largest public school district. It has 18,000 students, 45 schools in New York City. 94% of the students are students of color. 74% receive free and reduced lunch. 16% have disabilities, and I believe the national average is like 11 or 12%. So it actually has a higher percentage than the national average of children with disabilities, and 8% English language learners. That's just the demography of the school. The actual outcome is better. 99% passed math and 86% scoring at the highest level of 4, and 90% passed ELA in New York City. That's out of 7,400 students that took the New York exams to show proficiency. So when I look at this, Eva, and the last thing is, you just recently graduated 99 seniors from your first senior class that all were accepted to colleges like Columbia, Cornell, Howard, Rice, Swarthmore, Northwestern, Tufts. You know, this is this is the American success story. This is the proof of something I always want to see, what I call the achievement gospel. What's the good news? Tell me what the good news is, and this is it. So I want to start by asking you, to me, what just seems like a really obvious question to ask you is, I live in Minnesota. We are the birthplace of charter schools. I think in the beginning of charter schools, the idea was, if you build great schools, the public will just love you and you won't have to worry about the politics. You won't have to put any money into politics or into advertising or anything, because parents will just be so happy you've built great schools. You are one of my examples of why we should not participate in the belief gap when it comes to achievement, but you're also kind of an example of how that original idea was wrong. You're successful, and you're also a lightning rod for negative attention. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the proof of success, shows that there's nothing wrong with the children. There's something wrong with the delivery system that is robbing children, of course, inequitably, of their future. And you've got millions of children trapped in failing schools who deserve and are entitled to a world-class education. And we serve as a proof point that the system isn't working for literally tens of millions of children. So I think that's part of the lightning rod. I also, to be fair, Chris, you know this, I've been very outspoken about the teachers union or mayor of the city of New York, who is trying to deny parents the right to choose their school for their children. I'm the mother of 3. And I guard my right to select a school for my children. And I've, as I mentioned, 3, and they're different. I can't even go for one school for all 3 because they have different needs. And so, I wouldn't like it if the government said, you must go to this failing school. And I don't think other people should be told that. I think parents have a parental right to contrast and compare and try and find a school that works for their family.
Why have you been so outspoken, though? I mean, it goes back to you to the 90s, and you just seemed more motivated verbally more motivated than anybody to make this case. And I searched, I couldn't really find anything in your story or in your background that explained just the amount of fire that you have for this.
Well, Chris, it does, I think, go back to just even earlier. I grew up in Harlem. And, I always have to sort of say, yes, you can be white and grow up in Harlem. I did. And my brother and I, we were the only white kids in our schools, public schools, district schools, what at the time was a notorious district. It was District 5. It was known for corruption and, of course, poor academic outcomes. And the kids I went to school with were just as smart as my brother and I, but my parents kind of did a version of homeschooling before it was called that. They'd send us to school, and then at night and on weekends, my father would teach us math and science, and my mother would teach us literature, writing, history. And of course, my brother and I were bitter about this. Why would we have to go to school again? And my father used to, because you didn't learn anything. And it sounds maybe cheesy, but it did make a strong impression on me that the kids that I went to school with, they could have been educated if they had parents who were teachers or had the wherewithal to manage a job and teach their kids. But why should they have to? Why are they all paying for a school system that really was a warehouse? It was like a fence around children, and it was sort of a giant fiction. We all went, nobody learned anything, and then we went home. And the kids that I went to school with, I can see them in my mind's eye today. They were just as smart and capable, and many of them ended up in bad places for no reason other than getting a poor education. And so even as a kid, I was passionate about this. In 1998, I had this crazy idea that I was going to run for office on the platform of improving public education. And I remember Democrats kind of calling me, because it was a more Republican district and had actually been occupied by a Republican, saying to me, "Eva, you don't understand. As a Democrat, you can't criticize public education." I was like, I can't? Why can't I? It's not working for constituents. Why can't I speak out loud about that? So I became chair of the education, and then I started speaking more loudly. And, the teachers union took me out of office, and that was, a little bit unpleasant, but they promised that they would, and true to their word, they did. But I have no regrets about that. I thought it was important to speak my mind about something that was so germane to kids.
But you had the best revenge. So, I mean, okay, well, fine. I'm going to start a school and it's going to be very successful. So much about it seems to me, there's a backstory, and I saw a lot of the film from some of the meetings that you had in the early days that looked absolutely just bananas. Looked like the most bananas thing I've ever seen. It's politics and in education, just 101. Anybody who wants to go back and look at the file footage. But I still don't understand how a person, though, just sets out to start a school. It was at 2006 is when you founded Success Academy, and you get everything right. Like, I've been a charter school supporter for years. I've visited many aren't good. Many don't have a coherent educational philosophy or a great leadership or a team that is all on the same page going at the same pace. And then there's some that are. So I think it's pretty interesting that you just decided, I'm going to start a school. It's going to be successful. It's going to be well run. It's going to be organized. And it just happened. What did you bring to the table that made that happen? And what type of people and support did you have to make that a reality?
Well, I certainly didn't do it by myself. I am really blessed with incredible teachers and leaders and a network office. But I guess I want to maybe caution you a little bit on your framing, because I've made a lot of mistakes. It's been a lot of trial and error. I didn't sort of waltz over to success, I really had to create a culture of continuous improvement and clarity around why we do what we do. I always say that schools are for the children, but they're about the adult practices. And the way you create excellence is that you really understand that everything that happens in a school is a reflection of the adults. And so there's a huge blame game going on in schooling where the kids are blamed for all the things that the adults are responsible for. I always find it funny, Chris, when people say, oh, you're a no excuses school. I'm like, yeah, for the adults. The no excuses is not about the kids and the families. It's about the adults. We have to be accountable for the quality of education that we are offering. And so I've always sort of asked, well, what do I need to do to be a high performance organization? What do I need to do to have continuous improvement? And how do we have a school design that is going to allow us to have really strong academics, have really strong co-curricular, and really be about teaching kids how to think creatively and imaginatively? And what is it going to take from the adults to get there?
Mm-hmm. That's not really so first of all, I take to heart your characterization. You didn't just waltz over and it started on day one and you were ready to go and it was all, rainbows and kittens on the first day. Took some time, took some trial and error, which I think is really what charter schools were supposed to do, was, kind of figure things out, take some time, experiment a little bit and figure things out over time. But the way you characterize Success Academy right now is more broad than what people see it as. When they talk about no excuses, they think about drill and kill. They think about a joyless. You're taking all the joy out of schooling. Kids are just walking in a line with their fingers on their lip like this, like little robots, throughout the day. And you just described success differently than that. So tell me, reconcile the two. No excuses for adults, no excuses for the kids.
Well, I've always felt that schools can be thought of as sort of cod liver oil for children. And I've always been against that. I've always tried to do school design with joy and pleasure at the forefront. So literally when I've been doing school design over the last 15 years, I always ask myself, if kids did not have to come to school, either because there were no laws making them, or because parents, for some magical reason, didn't need childcare, would they come to school? How do you create a school where kids want to be there? And that looks different in elementary, middle, and high school. The same kind of thinking has to be applied at the classroom level. If kids were free to walk out of the classroom at any moment, which of course in our schools they're not, we're co-located, bathrooms are at certain times because of the facilities, etc. But if they were, are we confident that the children would want to stay in the classroom? Mm-hmm. And teachers have to ask that question every hour of every day. How do they make the curriculum as engaging as possible? How do we take into account that kids need and want recess? For some kids, recess is their favorite subject. And by the way, when we say 30 minutes of recess, we're not counting that 30 minutes when the teacher decides to go to recess. It's the time that the children are free to do what they want to do, and they have hit the play yard. And so school design has to be done from a child's point of view. When I go into classrooms, and I still to this day spend about 10 hours a week in schools, in classrooms, I always start at the front of the room so that I can see all the children's faces. And I can tell how good the teacher is by how happy the children look. If they are engaged, if they're not paying attention to me, they are so immersed in the learning, that means that teacher is good. And I don't think we've evaluated schools that way. How much joy and pleasure is there in the classroom, in the school? And by the way, we can't assume that because it's a dance class, there is joy. That dance teacher has to be really good. That art teacher has to be really good. The chess teacher has to be really good. We have at Success almost equal co-curricular with academics, because that's how important joy and pleasure is to us.
Totally different than what the characterization of your school is. And I don't know where it comes from, because at a distance, if I just listen to, kind of some of the lore about Success Academy, it's almost like there is a need to question everything that you all do. You're only successful because, and fill in the blank with something that's somewhat like cheating, not because of everything that you just said, and it's always surprising to me, because if it was easy to succeed just by cheating in some easy way, then we would have all successful schools and districts across the country, right?
Yes. I mean, it's very frustrating, and I sometimes can't, decide, is there sort of a conspiracy against us? And obviously there's politics, but it's interesting to me, Chris, that a lot of the journalists who write about us haven't actually been in the school. So it's hard to do this by anecdote or, our model and our design are a matter of public record. We have made that very, very public. We have shared our curriculum, all of our resources. We do trainings for educators around the country, superintendents, principals, teachers, really to showcase not that we have the only way to do it. It's one way to do it. And if you look at our curriculum, you will see engagement and a progressive pedagogy. So this narrative that we're a drill and kill, it's really an assumption, working backwards from the achievement rather than actually looking at what our curriculum is.
So what are you finding? You started in early grades, worked some things out over time, learned a lot about elementary school. There's a lot of talk about middle school being the place where Americans get it really wrong and, where there are real challenges. But I actually think high school becomes the part of the pipeline for charter schools that becomes very tough. So what are you learning with your first class graduating now? You made it to the high school level. What's your early learnings on high school?
Well, I love middle school and high school. I'm in elementary. I started more as an elementary school person, and I was a little bit nervous about middle and then high school. I actually just love those ages. I just think kids are so willing to take risks, and kind of their intellect is just blossoming in a way that is quite marvelous. So I love the school design work, and I love the kids' ages. I do find high school very complicated from a kind of management perspective. So take, for example, the sciences. It is very hard to have instructional management because the disciplines are so different. So you've got to have someone who can manage biology, chemistry, physics. We have an engineering program. We teach electrical, mechanical, medical, and environmental engineering. We also have a pre-med program, so we teach anatomy and physiology. Having one science leader who can do all those things is near impossible. Even in the mathematics, we're having someone who has the breadth and depth to do both algebra 2 and multivariable calculus. That's really, really challenging. To have someone, we have 2 years of the global canon. And then in the humanities, we have AP art history. So that's a very different discipline than literature, but it's all in the humanities. Just somehow the mechanics of running the high school is very, very challenging. The other thing that's challenging is, and wonderful, don't get me wrong, but the kids are able to do so much that, we did Macbeth in the fall, and it was the technical theater program is 45 kids. When you think about the actors, it was another 40 kids. It's just everything is large and voluminous, and managing scholar talent, it's all very challenging.
You say it's all very challenging. I mean, it's like you guys offer so much in one place that I can't imagine how you get it all done. And I know that if you're a charter school leader who's listening to this right now, they are probably scratching their head about how you have the resources to do this, how you have, let's just start with that, the resources to do with it. I do notice that in New York, you guys fight often about space. You need a place to actually be able to do schools. But how are you coming up with the resources otherwise to offer so much, to have such a rich program at Success Academy?
Well, I would say first, Chris, I don't know if I kind of came up with the resources as much as I think I took them, meaning, I have been advocating for equitable funding for charter schools since before I opened the first school. And that's a political fight. I am of the belief that a child is a child is a child. Why should a second grader in a district school get more money than a second grader in a charter school? We can have all the conversations, and we should, about quality, but there should be funding parity. And I have mobilized parents and myself done a lot of government relations to say, we got to have equal funding. I have not achieved that, much to my dismay, but I have been able to raise the per pupil charter funding quite significantly from when I started in 2006. But it was not just handed to the sector. We had to kind of scratch and claw and bring thousands of parents to Albany and do a lot of sort of one-on-one with elected officials. And, before I started mobilizing parents, the only kind of advocacy group in the halls of government, the halls of power, were the teachers union. And there were no alternative voices, and that's great, but that's not the only kind of lens through which we should be looking at schooling. And so to this day, I bring hundreds of parents to Albany, both from Success, but across the sector, to make sure that there is equitable and reasonable funding.
You've mentioned the teachers union a couple of times now, and I think if we had to think about a main, I don't know if you call it a foil or a foe in your trajectory, you definitely have not been shy about calling out when teachers unions aren't necessarily the proper policy advocates for our kids. But you've survived, and you've kept going over time. So would you say you barely,
but yes,
but you've done it where so many haven't. And I think honestly, it has turned a lot of people off from even wanting to have these fights and participate in what is largely called school reform, and they give up. So it burns a lot of people out to constantly have your integrity challenged. What would you say to the people right now who are even considering, like, man, I can't do this forever. It's too much.
As long as there are children not getting the education that they deserve and are entitled to, we cannot give up. We don't have that option. That is off the table. And look, I don't like the name calling or the venom. I'm really just very deeply concerned with racial injustice, inequity, in particular in the area of education, obviously writ large. I don't see giving up. And if that means some people are going to call me some names and I'm going to be controversial and a lightning rod. To me, it's motherhood and apple pie to fight for kids to get their turn in life and to be educated and to have choices. I find it's all sort of mixed up a little bit, but I try to take the venom down. I'm not trying to, rile people up, but I do think it's important to understand structurally why we haven't made progress on this issue. I come from a labor family. I certainly am very supportive of, good pay and health benefits. And, but when we're going to limit teacher-student contact hours and have all these work rules that make it very, very challenging to provide excellent education, I do need to speak up about that. And when the unions are dominating the politics such that parents are not able to have choices, I am going to speak up.
You have gotten parents very active in the political process, I think more than we've seen in most places I've seen. Entire groups of parents, large groups of parents, going up to the Capitol and saying, "Listen, this is my school, my choice, my right." They're saying all the things that you would want and expect them to say. Has that been for you something that you think has been effective and something that you'll continue doing? I mean, you've been kind of questioned about it before. Is it something that you think is an appropriate use of the parent pool?
I do. We try and stay in sort of a lane. So I'm passionate about, saving the planet or immigration reform or many, many other topics. I don't, as the leader, opine on everything under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think in terms of parental choice and charters, that is part of our mission because we have a dual mission. One is to provide a world-class education within our four walls. And the second part of the mission is to change the educational public policies that prevent so many children, particularly children of color, from getting what they deserve and are entitled to. And so public policies that impact parental choice and charters is something that we take on. And look, many parents, and it's hard. I didn't understand the politics of education until I ran for office. And then it started to become clear that you're not allowed to opine if you're a Democrat on certain topics or, how the political system actually works. You almost have to be an expert in figuring that all out because politicians are issuing press releases and, holding press conferences and yet things don't change on the ground. And it's really hard to understand why the school system isn't delivering and how to impact the school system. So I feel a moral obligation and to be fair, Chris, I'm also a former civics teacher. I feel a moral obligation to, kind of help parents navigate and how do they express their views on the issue of ed reform.
Yeah. On the civics part, you've understood that education is political. Speaking of that, 4 years ago, you said that, education is in crisis right now. And we needed leaders, especially at the highest levels, to really pay attention to that and come with an agenda. And here we are 4 years later, we're going to be voting this year for a president, a leader of the free world. Was it that you hoped to see, first of all, gut check me, like 4 years ago, you said that, and here we are 4 years later. How far do you think we made it? And, where have we landed?
Not in a good place. And, it's not such a free world, unfortunately. we were living in grossly inequitable times. I think there's been a profound absence of political leadership, particularly at the national level, but even more locally. There's just a tremendous amount of smoke and mirrors, not focused on the sort of at the local level on the pragmatic issues that kids and families face. I am very, very concerned that things were bad before Corona, but with schools shut down, things are going to be more inequitable, not less. So I am deeply troubled by where we are at this exact moment. From general institutional racism and police brutality to our school system, our healthcare. It is dispiriting, but yet, I guess at the end of the day, I'm still an optimist. It's within our control. We can change our public policies. We can change our schools. There's not one way to educate kids. There are a multiplicity of ways. We do have some good models at every level of schooling. And we have to lead at this moment in time. And I certainly, it feels sometimes like emptying the ocean with a teaspoon. I don't have illusions of grandeur, but I certainly intend to get up every single day and lead the way as best I can, because we have no choice. We cannot abandon children.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the drive there, we have to stick with it. The idea that we wouldn't just means that we give up on kids. And there's going to be so many kids in the United States right now who are capable of doing great things in the country that we're going to lose them in terms of human capital. No one can estimate how much we're losing every year just by having crappy schools. Yeah, at the same time, the politics aren't getting better, Eva.
Oh, no, they're not. Although
No.
I'm hopeful that there will be massive political change in the next election. I am hopeful. But I do think that this giving up, it's so foreign to me, just kind of personally, but you saw that in remote learning. And look, it was really scary. I closed the schools when New York City and New York State were saying, there's no way we're going to close the schools. Mm-hmm. My model really depends on in-person schooling. We have a project-based learning curriculum. It's not really made for being on the little box. And to stand up remote learning for 18,000 children was pretty scary and unprecedented for us. But you have cities like San Francisco saying everyone's going to get an A. You have cities saying, well, children aren't going to attend. And that was just so inconceivable. We met with our parents. I personally did dozens of webinars with parents to say, here's what remote learning is going to look like. Here's what it's going to look like in phase 1. Here's what it's going to look like in phase 2. This is going to be hard. This is uncharted territory, but we are going to educate kids as best we can. We're going to continue to teach them reading, writing, mathematics, science, K to 12. We too have experienced some loss of learning because this is really hard, this rectangular box, but I have 98% attendance. Mm-hmm. I have kids taking assessments, and there is some loss of learning, but we didn't just say, this is impossible, no way, we're victims, what are we supposed to do? We worked 24/7 to get it up and running. We got our teachers really pumped that we've got to do this for the kids. We are first responders. That was our attitude. We are first responders.
When your response, actually, you have been more agile than other schools and school districts in terms of the emergency that we're in right now. The pandemic has caused us to go to remote learning across the country. I have 3 kids in public schools. Our remote learning has been a hot mess. And somehow, Success Academy, you guys were able to quickly pivot and have somewhat of what looked like a coherent plan for continuing learning. And it sounds like you also have a summer plan for continuing learning. I have to keep asking you like the why behind these things. How is it that you're able to pivot so quickly, to be so agile, and to pull it off? I mean, in a way that looks coherent to the outside world and to parents.
I mean, I think, Chris, you asked about this before, and I think anytime you want to make a change, you have to have a culture of high performance. And I think we've underestimated that in schooling. It's not all about pedagogic technique. It's not all about curriculum. It's not all about school design. The adults have to have that culture by any means necessary. And if you don't have that culture, when you have to pivot to something like remote learning, it's not going to work. And I spend, as the CEO, I spend more time on that culture than probably anything else. Really making sure that we are values aligned, that the priorities are right, how we treat children, how we treat each other. That is sort of paramount. And so when we had to pivot to remote learning, kind of people understand the kind of sandbox within which we are operating. But I'll also say that we were fortunate in that not only do we have a robust one-to-one program, we had digitized everything that we do previously because we're not in the horse and buggy era, and we care deeply about efficiency and making sure that we're spending every public dollar in the best possible manner for children. And I would say the finances of schooling are not given enough attention. That's another thing that I spend a lot of my time on. How do you make every dollar count? Every dollar should count towards a child's life trajectory. And how do you do that so that we have no money to waste, not a single dime to waste, particularly not now in this economic context. And so really making sure that the money follows the values and everybody's aligned is important. We also got creative. And I always say, when you're in a crisis, you need to not be afraid to abandon certain aspects of your design. So not only, Chris, did we deliver remote learning, I would argue we made some improvements on our school design. We took, for example, our best math teacher in 7th grade, and that teacher did the launch and the discourse. And teachers who were less experienced were working with small groups of children, and we were able to kind of rejigger the model because it was all remote. When we're thinking about returning, and we return in August, pending public health, et cetera, we're really thinking about how do we use our personnel in the most nimble, responsive way to kids' needs. And so turning on the switch, it took a lot of doing and working 24/7. But we were in a better position, I think, because we have a culture of continuous improvement.
You've mentioned staff a couple of times, teachers in the classroom, which for most people, that's the point of sale. That's like where the magic happens between the person who instructs your child and your child. And it also seems to be a place that we're very weak in the United States about how we recruit, induct, train, monitor, evaluate, hire, and fire teachers. Seems to be like broken in each of those places I just said, in the recruiting part, the inducting, the training, all of that. How is it that you have created a stable or a network of teachers that you feel can get the job done for Success Academy?
Well, first, I would just say it's super hard at all those points. There's nothing I have discovered that is easy about closing the achievement gap and providing world-class schooling. But I would say that I made the decision very, very early on that while the schools of education are, doing good work in many places, they were not preparing teachers for the work that needed to be done. And so I needed a training arm. So we give our teachers, not just new teachers, but all teachers, 13 weeks of training every year. It is an enormous, it's like running a school of education while you're running schools. It's a lot of work, but I find that, a brand new teacher doesn't really understand the importance of phonics or how to teach a child to read. In mathematics, I find, teachers learned mathematics one way. We are very progressive. We do inquiry-based mathematics. And so it's very conceptual. And we have to kind of teach teachers that it's not all about getting the right answer, and what is the process of discovery about how and why the mathematics works the way it does. In something like electrical engineering, there aren't sort of teacher training programs on that front. So I've really had to kind of teach teachers, how do you deliver electrical engineering to high school students? What is the pedagogy behind that? We're actually ahead of many colleges and universities because they're almost all about content, and we have to marry content to pedagogy. And that is a highly skilled activity.
I find it's amazing that you can spend time in higher ed being prepared and being trained, and then you have to be remediated when you get to schools. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't. And look, I am very committed to making sure that our kids do not need remediation. I want to send our kids off to colleges with excellent writing skills. I want students to be able to major in STEM courses, which are called weeder courses often, right? Organic chemistry is designed to kind of weed out the kids who are not going to be pre-med or an engineering course. And of course, Chris, the kids who are often weeded out are often kids of color. And so making sure that kids have the intellectual training and self-confidence to have that staying power is going to be very important.
Eva, there are going to be people watching this and people listening to this who are going to give me a hard time for not asking you the tough questions and being, exposing myself as something of a fanboy. So how about we run through some of the critiques?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So the first one is around discipline, student discipline, that your discipline in Success Academies works as a function of weeding kids out. So it's the discipline that creates a better crop of kids for you.
Yeah, and I, Chris, in this is my 15th year. We have only expelled one child in 15 years. I think people are making assumptions that, when you suspend a child, that is leads to expulsion. That has not been my experience. We are a place that believes in sort of civility and respect in the classroom. You're not allowed to throw a metal chair at a teacher's head. That is not fair. And
that's too much. I can't take that. I need a school where you can throw a chair at a teacher's head.
Well,
I mean, who would be against that, really?
I know, but it's actually one of the teachers' biggest complaint in the district is that they're not the right to learn is not protected by the system, whereas we really believe in children's right to learn, their rights to learn, and the teacher's right to teach. The biggest number of suspensions we have, Chris, is actually plagiarism. And, we think it's our role. It's important to teach kids academic integrity and honesty. And I think people also think that suspensions at Success or anywhere else, that's like the only tool. And it's not. So we have restorative conversations with kids. It's always a new day. And it's really about an opportunity. It's a teachable moment for kids and families And often kids will tell us, they, punched that kid, and we'll get the kid talking about, like, what are you angry about? And what are the issues that you're facing at home or in your neighborhood? It really is much more than sort of a check the box suspension. We also have, pretty high student retention rates. And so this notion that somehow, certainly compared to our district counterparts, the notion that, if you're strict and you're clear and explicit and transparent, that means children and families will go. I have not found that to be the case. I have found that everybody understands what the rules of engagement are, and everybody is able to learn safely and respectfully in the school environment.
You mentioned retention. So you have a particular New York critic who likes to just follow you guys all the time, bird dog you with everything. And his number one thing is retention. So I like to celebrate success, not success charters, success period, for African-American and Latino kids who are beating the odds in the United States, because we have too many stories about them not doing well and not succeeding, that it creates what I think is a culture of nihilism around our children, around our people, a belief gap. So when I see a picture like yours that you guys sent out, 99 students, lots of black and brown faces, all black and brown faces, all with, like, their caps and gowns on, and 100% going to college, I think this is a good story. This is amazing. This is a story I want told over and over. As a black man in the United States, it's a story I want to wake up to every day. 100% got into college, right? And then immediately here come the naysayers with, well, that's only because there's some other kids that are missing. Like, you didn't retain all of your kids. What's your kind of, what do you say about the retention issue? And I've heard some people talk about backfilling. Like, if a kid leaves, you don't replace that kid. How important is that retention and the backfilling to the success of your schools?
Well, just factually, we backfill through the end of elementary, but it is true that in middle and high school, we don't. That's in part because I don't think it would be fair to our existing kids in New York City, in the communities that our kids and families come from. If you take in a sophomore in high school, they could be reading at a second grade level. And that would make it very challenging for the existing kids. And we don't have too many spots because our retention is fairly high. So it's those kind of two factors. But look, we are co-located with district schools that are losing 30% of their kids a year. And that's not just their fault, meaning there is transigence when you're serving poor kids. There's a lot of movement, families moving, and that's district and charter. Our retention rates are much higher. We lose between 5 and 10% a year, whereas often our co-located district schools are losing between 20 and 30% a year. So
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I've never heard that fact, actually.
Yeah. And I would just, I find charters, people want to do apples to apples comparisons in one context, but not other contexts. So that's just something to look at. But it is true, and here's a little bit of a dilemma, Chris. We believe in parent choice. So although parents can stay with us K-12, often at those sort of end of school design points, I'll never forget when I first opened the high school, we had our 8th graders. And I, was trying to convince the 8th graders to go to our high school. I had the disadvantage that it hadn't started yet. And so I was saying it's going to be great, but I didn't have it. And I remember this one young man saying to me, Ms. Moskowitz, I just can't go to your high school. I would have no one to date. I need new people. And, that's that young person's prerogative. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you can't be for parent choice and then not respect the choices of parents. They may not want, they may want more vocational education, or we've had parents leave us for single sex schools. Well, we're co-ed, we're not single sex. And so if that's the kind of design you want, you should have the right to do that. I'll also just say that some of our kids, often because of trauma, take a fifth year of high school. And I support that. I just, if you've had your father murdered, your studies are not the most important thing at that moment. And so, I have people criticizing that, we started senior year with, X number. I believe we started with 111, if I'm remembering correctly, and we ended up with 99. Most of those kids are still going to our school. They're just not graduating. It's not a one size fits all. And we have a lot of kids who experience a lot of trauma, and they may need to take a little bit longer.
You told me something earlier that I did not know, which was the level of which there's a lot of school choice in Harlem. I mean, oftentimes this is framed as, well, of course they try and get into your lottery because it's either your school or nothing. So, of course, everybody tries to get in your lottery. And what you told me earlier, I had not known, which is just that there's a lot of choice besides your schools in Harlem. People could choose other things. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what's that look like in terms of parents' options between you and district, and what else is there?
Oh my goodness. I mean, New York City, about 12% of kids in New York City attend charters. While they're not equally distributed, meaning Staten Island has very few charters, whereas Harlem is the charter and choice capital of the United States of America. Central Brooklyn has an enormous number of charters, and parents hop, by the way. They want to go to one, and then they try another and a third. And I think more choices are good. I think we don't have enough choices, and there's not one good way to educate a child. There are charter schools that have arts themes. There are others that are single sex. There are ones that have a technology theme. Some offer, more coding than others. At Success, we try and be sort of generalists. So we offer debate, coding, chess, art, music, dance. We have 5,000 kids playing soccer. We have a world-class soccer program. That's a sort of signature element of our school design, but you could have track as your signature element. Debate is something that is very, very important to us. And so we have very active debate teams. But, parents need to kick the tires and figure out, is it a theme? Is it the warmth and environment? Is it the level of responsiveness that they care about? What is it that is most important to the parent? And so I think it's just great that parents in New York City, finally, low income parents of color, have choices. This is like something to celebrate.
Mm-hmm. How are you doing family engagement differently than others might do it?
Oh, we are, this is a huge part of our school design. I never believed in what I call bypass surgery. I think a lot of schools started and said, families have so many challenges. We are just going to sort of usurp parents' rights, and we're going to kind of do it without them. I have never seen a successful school that can do that. And frankly, I find it a bit disrespectful. To me, parents are part of the equation, and we need to work incredibly closely with parents. It doesn't mean that they run the school and make all of the choices around the school. We have a particular school design. We are very transparent. We take a lot of time with parents to explain not only the what, but the why. And we do that up front. And then we have ongoing conversations with parents about the iterations of the school design. So after I was open for about 3 years, I decided that we needed to make a fundamental shift in the amount of play we had in elementary school. So all of my schools have a wooden block room. And our kids play with blocks, what some might consider an obsessive amount of time. I do not believe that. I think there's sort of an achievement gap in terms of block building, and block building is incredibly important for kids. We also play a lot of games in school, and I think there are incredibly educational benefits to game playing. And so that's a big part of our curriculum. We have to explain that to parents. Like, why would we play games in school? I mean, I get a lot of complaints. You're playing Settlers of Catan? I want you people drilling. I'm like, well, that's not who we are.
Which is amazing, though. I mean, because most of what you're saying right now is the opposite of the stereotype that you get saddled with all the time. You know, a 5,000 child soccer team. You know, I say this about Success Academy oftentimes. The average school district in the United States is a little over 3,000 students. So Success Academy at 18,000 students is a large district. So you're running a district, and you're running what might be the most successful district of color in the United States. Not even might be. I dare anybody listening or watching this right now who wants to challenge me, fight me on this. Find a district in the United States that is mostly almost 100%, but very close to that. All children of color, all on free and reduced lunch at a high level. I shouldn't say all, but at a high level, and performing at a high level. And I'll eat my hat. Show me that anywhere else. So when we talk about scale, this is a question I've always had for your guys' work, that there's a conundrum here. You have proven you can scale success, that it can be done. We can close the belief gap and then close the achievement gap and have a structure and a coherent educational philosophy that gets kids to perform at a high level and get on trajectory for a better life. Okay, so that's been proven. I also know that there are people like here locally from Minnesota that flew out to visit you guys, and it was almost like they had went to, you know, the Taj Mahal, and they came back with all these lessons, and they knew, oh, we know exactly what to do now. Like, we have seen the light, and they didn't. Which to me becomes a replication question, or a question of, like, you know, what's the breakdown there, Eva? Because people come, they study, they visit, and no, it doesn't work elsewhere for them.
I would say that I think education requires a lot more executional capacity than people think. And it is true that the magic happens in the classroom, and the relationship between the teacher and her students is of the utmost importance. But there's also a lot that happens behind the scenes to liberate the teacher to focus on building those relationships and really listening to students. And, you know, I didn't know anything about supply chain when I started, and I was amazed at how much stuff teachers wanted. We have like 21,000 items in a kindergarten classroom. And I had to learn supply chain, because when I started, I sent boxes of the stuff. If you knew how many types of Velcro teachers love and need, it would sort of blow your mind. But you know, they're very particular about their Sharpies and their this and that, as they should be. But when I first did deliveries, when I opened, I would have boxes in the center of the hallway, and teachers would go and they'd get their Unifix cubes and they'd get their crayons. And it took like 5 days of unpacking. Then I educated myself about kitting and warehouses. And now I deliver those boxes, a complete set for a kindergarten teacher, to her room with every item that she needs, and sort of suggested directions on where she can set up her room, how she can set up her room. And it takes about 4 hours, which means I have a lot more time to train that teacher on emergent storybooks, on how to do math workshop. How project-based learning is very complicated. Imagine the materials management as a teacher. That gives teachers a lot of stress. And so scaling is partly about ensuring that the teacher only does what only she can do best. And all of the back office, all of the operations are done by other people so that she can focus on the children and learning, their social and emotional development, their intellectual development, their character development. We have built a system that puts a premium on guarding the educators from all the other nonsense, and also executing all of the things that have to be executed. Take something like lunch. Lunch can be a really stressful time for kids. If you don't have a well-run lunchroom, it's not pleasant for them. And we went about looking at all the routines in the lunchroom. How do we make it as pleasant as humanly possible, more like a restaurant than a lunchroom with food fights? And all of that thinking makes the lunchroom run smoothly. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I've sort of gone on to other subjects.
No, that's a lot though. I mean, and this is the thing. I mean, I feel like you should do a master class for one. I think you should kind of like lay all this out and do the master class thing, because there's a lot to it. And I think people are interested. There's somebody who's going to start a charter school tomorrow. They're done with their application. They're getting started. And I've seen the cycle happen again and again. Hope, promise, hard work. They're starting the schools. They're doing all the paperwork. They're getting everything together. First year, they learn everything that they didn't know. Not everything. They learn how much they didn't know the first year, how much they didn't plan for. In the second year, hopefully they're rolling out of some of that. And hopefully they make it to third year, because it's, the game is pretty hard now. So it's good to hear from people who have really figured a lot out. I know we're coming close to our time here. I can't leave without asking, there were hints that you would run for mayor, and then there were hints that you were being asked 4 years ago to be Secretary of Ed. And each time I get a little bit excited that something like that's going to happen. And then each time you disappoint me, and you pull back and don't do it. So after November, let's say we have a change in president, Biden starts looking at things, and somehow his better angels say, I should pick somebody great for Secretary of Ed. He calls you, and let's just say you get pressured to actually do it this time. What would you do at a national level that could help us have more choice for schools, have better pathways for kids in the United States?
Well, I'll say two things. I mean, first, having really good people in government is incredibly important. And some of us are playing an outside game. Others are playing an inside game. And both of those are incredibly important to make deep structural social change. And so, that's part of my attraction to government, is just that it's so important that it's well run and truly services the people it is meant to serve. The work that I'm doing is right now feels so mission critical. And while you're right that I have scaled, I believe that I need to scale more. I also believe that I need to improve the quality more. There are a number of things about our schooling that I want to change and make better. And I believe I have a responsibility to kind of take our school design and our schooling to the next level. And that's going to take me some amount of time. But we're trying to open 100 schools, which would mean we would be serving 50,000 children a year, making us somewhere in between the Boston and Atlanta size school districts. And it's not growth for growth's sake. It's the belief gap that you're talking about that I want to take on. I really don't want to hear that we can't do it at a large scale. I don't believe that. It's hard and there are lots of minefields, et cetera, but I do believe we can do it. And I think I'm in a unique position to potentially prove, assuming I don't fail, which is always a danger. I think I'm in a unique position to prove that you could do it at that kind of scale. So right now, I sort of have my hands full with those sort of 2 projects. But I did want to mention just on your last point that I have a charter residency program. So if a charter school wants to learn about sort of the methodology and take certain bits and pieces of it, they can apply through something called the Robertson Center. And so we are trying to share whatever we've learned to educators all over the country who are trying their hand at this.
I love this last point. It's a good one to end on. We talked a lot, I think, in this discussion. I could talk to you about a million different things. An hour is not enough, but we talked a lot about the myths, the mythology around Success Academy, and the campaign against your success has been well organized, well funded, and it has grown over time to include many narratives, most of which I think you've disproven just in this discussion. But the one around like charter schools were designed to help create new ways of doing things and then share it back with the main districts, and we haven't done that. That's kind of one of the criticisms of charter schools. Is always a weird one to me because I haven't found a successful charter school leader yet who has said, I'm not going to share any information with the district or any what I've learned. And you all have gone even further. You've published your curriculum, you've shared, you're kind of transparent in that way. And now you're telling me that, you also have ways of teaching other leaders. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you for coming on today. I appreciate you for all your work. I'm going to get beat up. People are going to be like, oh my God, no, you should ask this, that, and the other. But no, here's the thing. I actually need good news. We have millions of Black and brown children in this country who are capable of doing great things, and they're being diminished every day by the American public school system that wasn't built for them, isn't designed for them, isn't helping them reach their highest potential. So when I find a school that is bigger than most school districts, or when I find a network that's bigger than most school districts, has more kids of color and on free and reduced lunch than most school districts, and is beating out schools that are wealthy and white and well-to-do, it's a big deal to me. It's a big deal, and we should talk about it. We should talk about it constantly wherever we can, and we should take whatever lumps for it that we have to take. So, Eva, thank you. Will you come back?
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to have you back again. We're going to continue talking because I'm going to get a bunch of questions after this, and then we'll come back and talk more about it. Thank you so much. And for everybody watching and listening, you can see across the bottom of the screen has been the way that you can find Success Academies online. Is pretty easy. If you just Google Success Academies New York, you'll find them, but it's successacademies.org. I think you should take a look at the website because it's not just a school website. It has more information there that I think is really important. Look at the results, look at the background, look at the mission, and be informed before you critique or criticize something that's so successful for us. So thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening. And Eva, thank you so much.
Thank you.